What's up, everybody? Welcome to Inside the Seams, where we bring hitters and pitchers together to talk about the game so it can grow. I'm really excited about this episode. You're going to love it. Let's keep going.
The reason you have cues and shortcuts and thought processes is because when that feeling happens in a game, right, the bad feeling or the feeling, the detracting feeling happens in the game, then you can go straight to that and you don't have to problem solve. And then from the hitter standpoint, it prevents reaction and prevents it prevents body language that's telling. Because I think what I was telling him, I said, look, you're not just keeping body language away from the pitcher and the catcher. You're keeping, in high school and in college too, you're keeping the body language away from the person who's calling the pitches. And so, like, if you can keep that body language away from that, then they're not sure the game plan is working, right? For most people, somebody like you know what your game plan is, and it's not, you weren't coming off of it. But I think, for most people, it's like, if I can keep the body language by having a shortcut, then that enables me to stay calm. On the same vein, I think that works for any baseball players, but especially pitching. And, I think some guys are more external with their reactions. Some people are more internal. So for the internal guys, it's a little easier to not show it, right? But I think, like, understanding, that's the whole premise of training, right? Is you want to train the movements, obviously, but it's the thought process, the cue, the thing that lights your brain up and your body up and connects it to where then, like, you don't have to think about anything. Like, hey, I'm drifting forward, so now I know this thing, I created it, and I know it works. And so I go right back to that. And, some cues last 2 weeks, some cues last 2 years, just depending,
Well, I like to tell guys, it's like, if you have 10 different ways to say the same thing, then you can troubleshoot in multiple situations. If you have, I had a kid last night we were working with, and he kind of stops his throw. And the only thing I said is, see how fast you can get that right hand past your left hip. And all of a sudden, first one, just wham, and he turns around and looks at me, and I'm like, let's see if it works again.
Yeah.
And then he does it again. And then he was going from a pitching tunnel situation to a live. So a lot of times we'll have them throw through the tunnel, start off with their pickoffs and go through all their stuff, get their feels, and then go over and face a few hitters.
I like that.
And then we got back over there, and he had kind of lost that feeling. And then exactly what you're saying, I was just like, hey, remember what happened over there? Like, I let him use the cue because we had inserted it then, but it was like going back to that connection, to that feeling. What did that feel like?
Yeah.
'Cause one day it might be get your hands past your hip. You hear a lot of guys say finish the pitch, or crack the whip, or you team pimp the finish, or, whatever, all the different ways that people like to talk about getting through the baseball, and I like to think of it, especially on like off speed, where it's like, if everything's supposed to look like heat to here on change up and slider, I'm actually going to rip even harder. So it makes it look like I'm, throwing that heater.
No, I love that. Yeah. And I just think that's a
big heater too, right? Because that's the one you like, right? That's the one. You've got that machine cranked up. You're on it. You're on it. You're on it. You love when somebody gets up there and just says, "Here it is."
Yeah.
I was coaching at the junior college level, and I'm going to use this as an example instead right now. But I have this notebook, right? So I went out and I took a page, or at the time it was index cards, but I gave each guy an index card, and then I went through the common cues that you'd hear, right? If you went to a typical, whatever, let's say you went to a high school or college practice and you were listening to a pitching coach, a lot of times you're going to hear stay back, get on top, finish the pitch. And those cues are good, right? They work for a lot of different things. But at the same time, I was interested at the time in, what do they hear? Because I had just studied this. It was actually for marriage counseling,
Mhm.
and it was the Love and Respect. It was called, but it was like men have these blue goggles, blue earmuffs, and a blue megaphone, and women have this pink earmuffs, glasses and megaphone, and each one is a different way of speaking, a different way of hearing, and a different way of seeing. And I'm like, well, if that's true even in a marriage, then how about in baseball? If I've got 14 pitchers that I'm looking to develop and I keep telling them all the same 3 or 4 things, how far are we going to get? Versus I wanted to learn their language, and then I wanted to go into also being a translator, because knowing that a lot of times these guys are going to go somewhere else after that, and they're going to be coached by somebody else. So teaching them how to hear what is being said. Like, hey, coach is saying stay closed. What does that mean? Or, hey, you're late. What does that mean? Because if you're late, you're actually early. But some guys feel they're early, some guys feel the late. So long story short, we go through and hand each one of these guys, and they hand it back to me, and I'm going through, and there's like 5 different translations for each one. And that's just in a group out of 14 guys.
Yeah.
So different guys hear things different, they see things different, and when they speak, they're saying it from a vantage point, right? Or even from a baseball IQ standpoint, or you've got so many different guys, guys that are two-way players that are just starting to pitch, guys that have pitched their whole life, relievers, starters, all these different kind of guys. So how are we going to be able to give each one of them ownership and a plan, but at the same time give them the individualism of when they're out there, we want them to be a dude, right? And yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you wanted to talk about, but that's one of my favorite ways that we went through, and it taught me as much or more than it taught them.
I'm sure. Well, and it's that there's so much good in that. I was talking with my my softball girl. Really, she's incredible. She's flying to Florida to try out for the junior Olympic team tomorrow, and so we were kind of like with her, right? Just with like a lot of the big time people you have, it's like it's just fine tuning, right? It's not. I can give her a drill and she can master it in three swings. It's not really even about that, and so we were talking about, okay, what's our plan going to be? What are we going to walk into Thursday with? What are we going to walk into Friday with? Like all this 3-day tryout, and what's your mentality going to be? Because physically, like she can hit balls out on a baseball field. She's just incredibly strong, incredibly efficient. She's just very talented. And so we were having the conversation of like, hey, like whatever, like we hit, like whatever, like that's now what are we going to do to get ready for this next step? So we're talking through the mentality part of it and different things. And so I asked her, I said, what do you like to hit early in the count or late in the count? And she goes, well, typically I do my best in late counts after I've fouled off pitches. And essentially I've seen every pitch that the girl has. And she goes, it doesn't really matter what the velocity is. Doesn't matter what the movement is. Like if I'm fouling pitches off, if I'm right on them, like I win. And I said, okay, is that I win physically or I win mentally? She goes, well, I think it's a mental thing because now I know they don't have anything that can get me at all. And so I said, okay, it sounds to me like when that happens, you have a shift. Your dog comes out, your alpha comes out, it's there. And she goes, yeah, but it's not like one of those things where I'm mean about it, or I'm this, or I'm whatever. I just like what it comes down to is I now believe that I can do it because I've seen everything. And so her dog coming out was going to look different than somebody else, right? And like there's a lot of like the FUMF person gets a lot of play, right, when you step into the box, but for most people that's not it either. And I think there's some anger there, and like for a lot of baseball players, I think they're just mad and they hate everybody. So it's really easy to hate the pitcher or hate the hitter or hate whatever it is. And in reality, that's good and can work and does work and has worked since performance and athletics have been around. But for her, it was about the belief in herself, because she struggles with that a little bit, right? Just like we all do. She's just so talented, has no idea. So what we were able to discuss is like, okay, when was there a moment where you felt the most belief in you that you ever have, ever? And what did it make you feel like? So she's walking through it. It's like when this one coach grabbed me by my face and told me, you know, yada, yada, yada. I was like, okay, well, what did that make you feel? She was like, there was nothing that could touch me at that point. And I was like, okay, well, let's try something. Whenever you step in the box, we're going to do some at-bats. Whenever you step into the box, before you get in, I want you to play that scene in your head, in front of your brain, watch the movie, and let the feeling that came from those words be there. Because what that could help you with is now you're going to walk into the first pitch, into the at-bat, with the same belief that you have after you've seen 8 pitches. And man, it was the craziest thing. I kind of knew it would work because I know her so well, but I wasn't, you never know. Mm-hmm. And she hit 8 balls in a row. I've never seen her hit balls like that personally, in person. And I just stopped and I looked at her and I was like, that's your dog. It's belief. It's completely different than probably what you've been told or what you've learned or whatever. And the reason I believe I was able to tap into that is because I got to know her so well beyond the swing or the pitch or the anything. She struggles with self-belief. So she doesn't need to be a dog. She needs to believe in who she is. That's it. That is the dog.
And that makes her. Yep.
Yes, that makes her the dog. And it goes back, that's what, that's a mental part, right? That produces the physical, but you can even be a little bit less deep than that. And you can find physical that will do the same thing, right? That's what I call them, macro cues, just because I've taken a lot of economics classes and stuff. And so, it's just a thought process that unifies the brain and the body that gets a bunch of stuff accomplished. And I think that's why people think stay back. They think hands inside. They think whatever, because if I do that, it can help me fix what's going on. When in reality, that's your brain problem solving in the moment, which isn't bad, but it's going to be very rigid. It's not going to be thought through. It's just going to solve the immediate problem, right? It's the same kind of thing where it's like when you start bleeding profusely, your body goes into panic mode, goes into all this stuff to stop the blood, right? Or when cortisol gets released in your brain, like it shuts down other systems so it can solve the problem in front of it. And it's not always the best way to solve it or the quickest or the most efficient, but it does get solved. So I don't think we want that to happen all of the time when it comes to swing stuff, pitching stuff, whatever. We want to know what that is. And then we let that problem solving ability of the game, of the different arm angle, of the different situation of the last 3 at bats. I've struggled. I've never been in this situation right here. And those cues, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, whatever it is, allow your brain to stay focused. All right. Shea Hillenbrand said something the other day. He said, in my opinion, the only reason you have a routine is so then when the pressure mounts and you go from playing in front of 5,000 to 50,000 and the stress mounts and this mounts and all that stuff, he said, you just focus on the routine because you have to. Because if you don't have something to focus on, then that is
right?
Yes, it's going to get to you. And that was just, I've heard stuff like, that was just so good to me. I loved how that was articulated. And that's the whole deal. We work on the physical so we know what to focus on after we throw a bad pitch. We work on the physical. We have the notebook in the dugout. So when I have a bad at bat, I go back and say, I didn't lose the at bat. I lost this pitch. right? And if I took a better approach or a better swing at the 1-1 pitch, I wouldn't have lost in the 1-2 pitch, or vice versa, like whatever it is. And that's the shift in training. That's the shift that's how actual performance is, right? And because it just, when you can't complain about purple apples when you won't go find the purple dye that's coming up through the root system to make the apples purple.
Absolutely.
And it's like, that's where it's so much about like less talking, more listening. And it seems like such a basic concept, but it's not, because we don't do it. We don't even come close to doing it. And I think one of the things that I believe has propelled me into be able to do some of the things that I've done, like have the conversation, have the influence that I have the whatever people want to call it, is I just listen to what people say and then I do it. Like it's really that basic. Like, people don't believe me when I say, I'm like, when I went out to hang out with John, like I just listened to him. And like, it had nothing to do with pitching. I listened to how he interacted. I listened to how he listened. I watched how he did all that stuff, because he's good at what he does. And it's not just this. That's the thing. Like, that's what sells, right? I can tell you how to do it. When in reality, it doesn't sell, because it turns you into an addict. That's really the only difference between somebody who sticks a needle in their arm and somebody that goes to pitching or hitting lessons is one leaves his car and one doesn't. That's it.
Well, I think that's the idea of teaching a man to fish instead of giving him a fish. If you give the man a fish, he eats today. But if you teach him how to fish, then he's coming back, for other things, versus if they keep needing, like what you're talking about, like the addict, where it's like they need that, versus, okay, what if we're foundationally progressing where it's, we'll call it lily pads, where it's like we're frogs and we're hopping from lily pad to lily pad, and it's the playing the game one pitch at a time, like you were talking about a minute ago too, right? Where it's like, that is one of these processes that helps in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Is that easy? No, it's super hard, especially emotionally and mentally to flush the previous pitch, as Brian Kane would say, right? But to get right into this one. And then being able to digest it, like you were talking about, where it's like, okay, if I win that 1-1 count, things are a little different. So like next time as a hitter, then my game plan is to win that. For the pitcher, it might be get to 2 strikes before you get to 2 balls, something like that. Or like the game plan that we teach all of our pitchers is get ahead, mix it up, put them away.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's broad, because you got to understand yourself after that. But then it's, okay, get ahead, mix it up, put them away. Now I'm out there, and whoever steps up to the plate in whatever situation, let's say a big situation, what am I going to do? I'm going to go right back to that same thing. I'm going to do my breath, my pre-pitch, little 4x4, and then I'm going to get ahead. I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to put them away.
Well, what I love about that philosophy and that methodology is there's a lot of things that fit underneath of that. You can get ahead, put them away, mix it up and put them away if your best pitch isn't working, or the umpire's a little tighter, or this, or, like you got a rookie catcher behind there or a freshman catcher. Like, you can do, there's so much that plays from that. And that's one of those like big picture macro things. That's why it works, because it's now how you're going to do that could change every game, could change on the innings potentially, but depending on what's going on.
Like kids, the kids will come in and I'm like, okay, what's your game plan?
Throw hard.
Strike everybody out. Throw strikes. Just all these different things, and you hear it enough.
Mm-hmm.
And my buddy Matt Hammonds taught this to me. I mean, man, whatever year it was. But it was something that I would have loved to have had, especially when I was younger. Because it's like, oh, man, I had a good sinker coming up. So it was like, just let them beat it into the ground. And that worked for a long, long time. But then it's like now all of a sudden I'm facing guys maybe in a situation where I would like a strikeout or I would like a ground ball and now I'm still get ahead, mix it up, put them away. But what I'm looking to do in that situation is a little bit different, you know. So like you said, it's broad.
Well, and that's where it has to be, right? It's such a unique balance of like it's broadly specific almost, right? Because it's not super specific, but it's enough to where now we have a baseline. Now we know this is my bottom floor. That's what I'm trying to do, and everything that I do is this. So now we have the foundation, we have the baseline. Now, how are we going to build the house? And once we get to the second floor, it's going to change a little bit. And we thought it was going to look like this, and it doesn't. So we're going to have to revamp the plans a little bit and maybe move this board and this beam over here a little bit so we can go from there. And that's the beauty of, that's why the foundation is so important with anything, right? But, you know, especially in the example of the house, but like even more so in humans, where, you know, and people don't understand that like within the house builder thing, the foundation is literally what they spend the most time on planning wise to make sure. They want to make sure it's on a sunny day. They want to make sure it's not too hot. They want to, all these different things. And yeah, it's super important to understand that the foundation, a lot of times foundation is, you know, built in years, not days. And that's a hard concept because just in general, human beings, we want, you know, people like to blame, you know, all the technology and the microwave stuff that we live in, which is true, right? But humans have wanted stuff instantly, no matter what. Like it's been that way no matter what. And, you know, you look at, like, I just saw the Napoleon movie with my brother and my dad, and I would say it was okayly historically correct. But there were instances that Napoleon almost took over the world. He was pretty stinking close. Like, he was really close. And he made a couple key mistakes that downfalled him. And one of the key mistakes was not being patient, not being in the long play, wanting it immediately. And that's what kids do, right? We've all got a little bit of inner kid in us. I think we've got a lot of inner kid in us in a good way. But then there's also some stuff that's inner kid that we gotta rewire a little bit, because, you know, with him, like, if he'd have just waited for a little bit longer and maybe waited another year, another 2 years, like, he would have been fine. And that's hard, right? But that just proves that it's not just a microwave society thing. It's worse now, but it's always been there.
Just because they actually get the satisfaction of having instant access to, you know, information or technology or quick fixes or
100%. The drill packages, right? Like, going to help you for about 2 weeks, and then it's not. That's one of the things I was like, I got the clip. I'll have to send it to you when I finish it. But so the softball girl, we were doing some like long PVC pipe feels because she thought she was like a little disconnected on her upper half, and so we were just like, yeah, kind of like that. And then she actually wanted to do some stops where it was that kind of thing, but then stop. And I didn't tell her to do that. I more told her to do these where she could feel the whoosh and feel the like striking the ball and the happen. And the second time she got up there, she did like a 3/4 stop, and she was like, "Oh, sorry." I was like, "No, sorry." Like, yeah, like she was there and then just like stopped, like got to contact and stopped a little bit. And she goes, "Yeah, I don't know. I really like that. I can feel like the end of the bat or end of the pipe like coming this way and controlling that." And I'm just like, okay, well, let's do that some more, because like that's amazing. And I took some video of it and showed it to her, and it was just like, it was super crazy just to see the happen. And then we moved back after doing that constraint work, and I was like, remember, that didn't help you. That didn't fix you. That constraint did not fix anything. what happened is that constraint gave you another way to think about it, and you didn't do what I told you to, which is great because that's not what you needed. And so now you knew and you felt that, and now you got this instant, like she was fixing stuff on like disconnection stuff, like instantly. She's like, "Yep, I gotta feel the end of it, be able to go that way." I'm like, "Sounds good. Let me know when you want me to throw it again."
There you go.
Exactly, right. And so I think it's shifting that, where this drill is going to fix you. It's like, no, this drill is going to give you a different way to feel it, different way to think it. So now, what did you come up with? And that's the whole thing of, and I know we've talked about this a ton, where it's like people think information is the end all be all because we're in the age of information. I completely disagree with that. I think the information is designed to stimulate our brain to then find something.
Solution, like application, right? Like, hey, here's the book.
And that's really it, right? And that's why it's like it's so important for like, yeah, I would talk about a little bit how what you used to do when you would like read body language, like when you were pitching or when you've been a pitching coach, or like all that stuff. What's a like staple for you as far as like what body language tells you going forward, like when you're approaching an at bat or an inning or whatever?
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of it, especially as a coach, is like knowing your guy again, where it's like, okay, if I got a guy like me, one of my keys was, and it goes back to I was 15 years old, facing a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds, and my uncle was there at the game, was always kind of around with me. And after the game, he says, "Hey, Johnny, you got ice in your veins." Because it was like there was this calm confidence for me, right? Other guys are like puffed out and big when they're confident. So it's part of it's kind of knowing your guy. But like for me, with being calm, if I ever went outside of that, like let's say I'm trying to force stuff, that's when I'd always struggle.
Mm.
So it was knowing myself, but then once I'd start to get to know a player, let's say I got a guy who's like me and he's out in the game and he's forcing stuff, a lot of times it's just a reminder of, okay, back to you, versus maybe another guy who's more of a fire up guy. He's got to be up here to have the confidence to do what we need him to do out there on the field, right? And attack and go right after guys, all that fun stuff we talk about. But I think reading your guys and what they know is different than maybe reading body language of somebody on the other team. Because, the higher up you get, some guys are really good at baiting guys too, where it's like, oh man, I'm going to look really bad on this pitch just so he throws another one. And you see that sometimes where it's like, and you can even, you can fake out some of the best sometimes where, you see guys look silly on a breaking ball, and then all of a sudden, what do? Oh, you throw another breaking ball. What's he doing? See ya.
Yeah.
But as far as part of it for me too is being aware of and having anticipations based upon the situation that was there. So if I come up and I'm facing this guy and there's a man on second base, things are a little bit different than if I'm coming up and I'm facing this guy and nobody's on. Right, especially first pitch, like how I'm going to pitch him, because if nobody's on, nobody's out, and I got my little notebook that I take on guys, and this guy rarely swings at a first pitch, and I've maybe decided which side of the plate I'm going to go to. If I know he's taking the pitch, it's different than if I think he's swinging. So I think sometimes that body language does also feed into the anticipation of having baseball IQ for the situation. Or even with a base runner, looking over and making eye contact with a guy, a lot of times you could tell. Now, most of my career as a late guy, so guys would be like, who cares about that guy over there? But I would always still want to at least make eye contact. And a lot of times that too, you're reading body language. It wasn't just how far is he off the base. You can tell when guys get antsy. You can tell when they get squeezing that bat a little bit harder, or maybe they're for their last 5, and a guy's really pressing, and you can see certain things if you're paying attention to the game that give you an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot of times what you're looking for too is you need to be yourself and do what you do. But then at the same time, if you can recognize a weakness or kind of like, let's say a hitter's going to try too hard because he's been struggling, I'm going to feed right into that versus if I got a guy he's going up there and the ball looks like it's this big and he's raking everybody. I mean, you already raked our starter and he's doing this and that. I'm going to approach the situation a little bit differently. Maybe use his aggressiveness against him. Throw him that fastball he wants on the inside, but it's, another 2 balls this way.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like he's gonna get it, but he's gonna hit it foul. And that's gonna tease him, or that's gonna make him mad. Or, you just see certain things where maybe certain counts where guys would really struggle with certain things. And if you're paying attention to the game and the guys that were throwing before, or you face the guy before, I'm like, hey, I know I can get ahead, mix it up, and my put away against this guy is a high, hard one. I'm going to climb the ladder. Or, hey, you got some guys that you do that and that's their dream. A lot of times I think a lot of good hitters eliminate the inside part of the plate with 2 strikes. So for me, especially early on, I got good at dotting that inside corner. Where it's like, cause I talk to high level hitters and they'd be like, if you can do that 3 times in a row, I'm going to tip my cap and I'm going to go sit down and I'm going to get you next time.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially for me with sinkers inside to a righty, I mean, the arm side was something I was always good at.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I'd face certain guys like he just popped into my head, but this guy, Phelan Lentini, that I played against, whatever, for years. And he knew the bulldog in me was going to pound in there, and he just would get a little smarter and he'd step back 6 inches from where he'd normally start because he knew it was coming in here.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't trying to yank it. He hit doubles in the right center gap like it was nobody's business on this. And if I was in my right state of mind, I would see him do that. Some days you'd be, for me, if I was charged up, I'm like, I'm throwing it anyways, and then sure as shit, there's Faye standing on second base back there, with a grin on his face, and I know what he did, even though he maybe gave me, I could have lived out over here.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, there were days where we did that. So that was the chess match. That's beautiful. That I know we really get a kick, out of talking about and enjoying together.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just I love that. I think it seems so simple to us, and I'm just constantly reminded by those around me that 1, it's not simple for everybody. 2, it's a lot of people don't know and understand that, so they don't know how to do that. They haven't had to do that, especially this brand of baseball. Now it's just kind of show up, throw hard, and nobody's saying they shouldn't throw hard. Listen, like all of John's guys throw hard. I've been there and been trying to coach hitters and to hit it, and it's almost impossible, right? Like, I mean, I remember when, I think it was Graham was in there, was throwing, and he was throwing well, and a couple of ASU kids were in there just getting live at bats or whatever, and like, so I'd seen Graham throw twice already, and the kid walked in and he was like, or we were talking before, he's like, all right, what's he got? I was like, look for a fastball at your shins if it's their swing. Everything else don't. And I'll be damned. He walked in and he threw that fastball that looked like it was right. Looked like it was right here, and then it ended up in his eyes. And he was like, he turned around and he was like, you weren't kidding. I was like, yeah, man. Like that's all there is, right? So like John's guys throw hard, right? Every single one of them does. But I think the part that is lost, right, is the how to do that stuff. Because if you can do that stuff and you throw 100, right, and you throw 97 and your spin rate's 1,000,000, like it's a game over, right? So if you were going to give somebody like the how-tos of how to start doing what you just described, watching the game, there's so many things that I heard in there that were just tremendous. So what if somebody was going to start, like a coach wants to start teaching people how to do that, a player wants to start, how do I start that on my own? What would be the how-to steps on that? If somebody's starting out on their own, they don't have guidance, they don't have anything, and what would that look like? How could they start doing that on their own? Because I think you do that better than just about anybody I've run into. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of value in your how-to.
Well, I mean, I'd say first of all, success leaves clues. So like, let's find examples of guys that were good at this, and then go watch them. Like, I think the first one that pops in my head is Bob Gibson. Like, I'd go back and I'd watch film of Bob Gibson, how he approached, what it looked like. He's the predator out there, and he's noticing things. You know what I mean? He's reading body language. Now, at that part of the game, or that time of the game, it was a lot more accepted to knock people down. So I think the intimidation factor that you see with him, you know, maybe some guys, I've had this conversation with guys and I'd be like, yeah, but I can't just throw at guy's face and make him scared. I'm like, well, you know, you can still give bow ties and like move feet. Like, for me, it's not always just moving feet with fastballs. Where it's like, sometimes if you're a left-handed hitter and I throw a slider in your left-handed batter's box where your feet are, you're not in there quite as comfy, right? But I mean, I think kind of seeing how guys react, you know, and getting, if you're coaching, you got to kind of know your guys, like fight or flight-ish, right? Where how is this guy going to handle, as Mike Tyson would say, everybody's got plans until they get punched in the mouth, right? Or until they get punched. It's that. So first, see how your guys react when they fail, when they stink, and then kind of teach them how to see that in others. But I think a lot of times you have to watch the game, like even watch old school games. Like Kevin Brown's another guy that I like guys to go watch. Roger Clemens, I think, was awesome at his mound presence stuff. So starting to kind of see that if success leaves clues and you've seen these certain characteristics, you use the word dog. I love the word dog, because that's, I think, something that's already inside of you. Whereas like with Sifu, a lot of the stuff that he teaches with the animal stuff is like, this is already in you. It's like innate. It's instinct that we're looking to get to come out, versus, I think, you know, and there are guys that I've coached that are they're thinkers and analytical, but I think the majority of the best ones have an ability to kind of block this out and just get super present. You know, and even I think other sports are good to watch. Michael Jordan's a guy I like guys to go watch. Like, go watch the documentary that they made on him, and just that the level that he held himself to, but then also the level that he held other people around him. And I think that that's something, you know, if you're a coach and you want more dogs in your culture, you got to be a dog, right? It's like, you have to exemplify those things that you would like to see your players do, because they're going to follow what you do, not just what you say. Anybody can sit here and say, hey, let's do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, I'm watching you and you're doing this, this, and this. So there's a big disconnect, you know? So I think if you can walk your talk and start to give guys space to learn who they are, how they react in these situations, you know, I think challenging guys other than just on the baseball field, you know, sometimes getting guys to whatever. I mean, basketball is obviously a beautiful sport, but there's time and place. You know, if you're in season, you probably shouldn't be playing basketball games with your guys. But even seeing your guys shoot or do, we used to do Mikan drills when I was at Michigan State. Do you know what that is? The George Mikan drill. So it's like you go up for a righty layup and then a lefty layup and righty, and you just go back and forth. And you had to get either 10 in a row, or you had to get stopwatch, how many can you get in 20 seconds? But what that did is that would kind of bring out that dog, that competitor that's inside of you, versus the analytical of the thoughts. So I think A, teach guys by walking it, B, allow them the space to do it, and then give them the environment or the culture to develop it. You know, even simple stuff like Brian. I'm a big fan of Brian Kane. Cool dude, but the last time I saw him, he had a full room of guys playing rock, paper, scissors. You know, and I do that a lot of times with our guys. You probably seen me do that because I like doing that. If there's anything that comes up and it's a debate, even ball or strike, and the hit tracks misses it or whatever, and it's like, okay, rock, paper, scissors. Just to see guys compete. So how do you react when you win? How do you react when you lose? And then if you can, as much as you can, carry yourself in a manner that no matter what happens, you act like you did that on purpose. But especially as a pitcher, I think as a hitter, I'm sure it's equally of importance. Just for me, I have very few high level at bats. I mean, I have a few, but I was so outmatched at that point that the mentality for me was just survival almost. Versus I think when it's really like, you know, me versus you or me versus Mark or somebody gets in the box and there's the chess match engaged, it's a different place, you know. And I think allowing that instinct to come out takes practice. Just like, you know, like for me being calm, Bruce Lee said it, but I mean, a lot of guys, calm's a superpower. But how do you develop calm if you never practice being calm? And then practice being calm with nothing going on. And then can you practice that same calm with some chaos? You know, and it's that idea of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And you know, and different guys show that different ways.
It's really good.
Was that kind of step by step as far as that goes?
No, that's great. That's great. And I think one of the things that I want to highlight on what you said, there's lots and lots of stuff there. So if you're watching this, listen to this, like go back and listen to it and write them down so they're easy and tangible for you to understand. And what I want to topple on with that as well is the model what you want. And I think a great example that is relatable would be I've got a mentor who was a tank commander, and he loves the movie Fury. Right, we've had many discussions about life and different things based on the movie Fury. And so one day I asked him, I said, "What is that accurate? Is that pretty accurate to how a tank runs, how a tank squad runs?" And you know, I'll never forget his answer. He looked at me and he goes, "That's almost exactly how it is." And he said the biggest thing about being a leader anywhere, but especially in the tank brigade, is in the tank brigade, the leader, the squad leader, is the first guy in the line. And you know, tanks don't move very fast; they're not very mobile. And a lot of stuff's just going to bounce off of them as far as artillery. But there's also a lot of stuff that'll get through, penetrate, hurt people, blow the stuff up. And so they're moving really slow to go places. So they get hit by the big stuff a lot because they're coming and they're going to do damage, and it's hard to stop them. So he said, in the tank brigades and the tank commanders, like, we're first, and it has nothing to do with position. It has to do with, if anybody's going to get hit, they're going to hit me. So the rest of my squad can splinter and be safe. And he said the craziest part is everybody we're fighting against knows that. So they're going to shoot at us first, and they know it's us. The reason they're shooting at us is because they know it's us. They know that we're the leader. And he said that's why a lot of people don't sign up to be the leader of a tank brigade, because you're willingly choosing to be known as the hit person that needs to get hit, because that's a tactic, right? Is you take out the leaders, there'll be chaos. And you know, in the same vein, he was like, that's how we have to lead. We have to lead as the first person, knowing we're going to get shot, knowing we're going to do this, and still do it anyway. He was like, truly, that's love, if you want to look at it in that vein, right? And he was like, so I think that directly correlates to the coaching. It's very little to do with what you say. You know, my dad says it in this way: is like, do it and use words when necessary. They're not necessary most of the time. And so, you know, vision boards, vision statements, all those things are very popular and for good reason. They also have limitation, and they also can be a crutch. When in reality, you got to model what it is, and that means you're going to get hit first, you're going to get embarrassed, you're going to mess up, you're going to have to apologize, you're going to have to do all that stuff. Because you can go, and I've worked in lots of different places with lots of different people groups, and the work group of the leader almost always takes on the characteristics of the leader. You can feel who the leader is by being around their people. And that is 100% true. Like, I have seen that in every instance.
Any team I've ever played for. It's
Yes.
Like they take on the personality of the manager, especially if you're there over the long haul, like spring training, it'll be like, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're to the first half, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, yeah, this team's acting a lot like this guy. And then,
well, it's like you look at the Rangers.
Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's
facts. That's absolute facts. And you look at the Rangers, right? Like, obviously, like, I think that, you know, Bochy played a huge role, and they also got a really good support staff as well, right? But like, it's when you listen to the players talk, that you could hear his personality come out. You could hear it, right?
And his patience, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
thing. When I see him, and every time I hear him, I've got to meet him, but it was like there was a calm presence, and I think that allows everybody else, especially because they were best team of baseball, and then they struggled, and then came back and finished to be the best team of baseball. But I think if he was maybe whoever else, let's say, and he had lost faith or he had lost hope, then it'd be different versus like somebody that's been there and done that. It's just like,
yep.
And then somebody else is like, woo, 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 you know, riding that crazy ass roller coaster that we see a lot of players do too. But I think you definitely see it with, well, I don't just think I've been in that.
Yeah.
I've played for that manager that we had to go get the easy button to run the bullpen, or, you know, there's just certain things where certain guys, once again, fight or flight, they react differently. And if the manager's spazzing, guess what? I mean, most likely everybody's spazzing. So if you want your players to act calm, you should probably learn how to be calm yourself.
You got to model it. Right. And that because that's what it comes down to, is like, people think they can hide stuff from players, from people, from marriage. They think that you can only do it for so long. And realistically, you have to be a complete moron to not see it. People know. They may not know exactly what it is, but they can feel it. Or they can, oh, he's talking a little bit differently. Like, I'm not sure what that is, but it's a note. It's
especially when the pressure hits, right? Where it's like, okay, because that's why, I mean, we've all seen, I played with a bunch of guys who were really good 6 o'clock hitters, you know, and then the lights come on, and then I also play with guys who are really good hitters with nobody on base. And then you got guys who it's like, okay, that guy's clutch. So how do we have that clutch guy? Well, I mean, you got to practice being in situations where you have to be clutch. You know, and give yourself an opportunity to struggle in those situations to learn how to succeed. Because I mean, very rarely do people just fall out of bed and just, oh, they got it.
No shot.
Like, you see it in other areas, and you see where it carries over, and then that's the success leaving glues again. You're like, hey, this dude's really good at, you know, for example, let's say a multi-sport athlete. This is the guy taking the shot with the game on the line. Okay, now he's playing shortstop and the ball is hit to him. Okay, this is that guy versus the guy that, you know, maybe can throw a sand ball covered with rubber through a wall really hard, but then you put a batter in there and things change.
Things change. Well, that's where, like, you know, I'm obsessed with studying Michael Jordan as a competitor and a athletic performer. And we both shared this video a couple months ago, but it was him doing a voiceover talking about how many shots he missed, how many games he lost, how many game-winning shots he missed, on all the above. And it was like, that's it right there. Nobody remembers. He remembers the ones that he missed, right? Most people don't remember the ones that he missed. And so being in that moment allowed him to, I don't know. I think it's just not, you're not intimidated, right? Because I think fear is always going to be there.
You've already messed up.
You've already messed it up.
Like you see it where it's like, and I think that's also where you learn the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, okay, hey, I rushed, I got tight, whatever, versus like, I mean, I know for me, when it came down to when I'm coming in to close the game, if I just went out there and trusted my stuff and just stuck to my plan, I was going to win a majority of the time, right? Versus if I went out there and I was like, oh, let's make up a new pitch today, or let's try something different or whatever. And it was like, okay, I mean, we've all done that and that's how we've learned. But I mean, I think that's where it's like time after time after time after time. And then getting to talk to, I mean, you know, a lot of the guys I've got to be around, and it's really fun to learn from those high level guys. And you just keep hearing a lot of the same things, you know, and it's trust, belief. How important is that? I mean, you talked about it earlier, right? Like being able to believe in yourself, like knowing, having this know about you that whatever happens here, I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Like Dave Matthews says, everything going to stay okay, you know, like,
right.
But it's because of all the stuff that's happened to lead to that without real life experience with it or real exposure to doing it wrong. Like, how are you ever going to learn the contrast?
You won't. You can't. And that's what's always funny about belief. When people talk about it, they think it's just believing the good things, right? And I'm not even saying necessarily believe the bad things, but like when you believe in who you are, you know what you're not. So it's not intimidating to you when it happens. You don't want it to happen. It's not the goal for our weakness to show up. But if I know my strengths, if I know who I am, if I know what I do well, I know where my areas of improvement are, then I know that. You're not telling me anything that I don't know already. And there's a strength to that, to knowing you have a weakness, knowing that you have faults, knowing that you have all of that stuff. And it's not like being okay with it in a sense where I'm just going to leave it here, but it's like, yeah, that's part of me too. The imperfections, the imperfect perfection. That's what perfection really should be, right? Is, hey, I know that I missed 3,000 shots. I know I missed 29 game-winning shots, but I'm going to make this one. And
man, there's only one way to find out sometimes, right?
It's just, there's just
do it again.
Do it again. Do it again. Like, okay, great. Now let's pick up. And I think what happens a lot of times, and this is a human thing, but it very much shows up in baseball, is the human mind is very, because of its supercomputer capacities, are very driven to be critical and find things wrong. Because if we find all the wrongs, then we'll be right. Well, that's never been the case and never be the case in anything. But if we're going to accept where we have faults, we have to accept where we have strengths. Because if all we do is look at what's wrong or try to break something so something could be wrong, so we have something to fix on, something to work on, this game isn't worth it. Life isn't worth it. If that's all it is, that's not it. Like, that's not worth it. Like, all I'm gonna look at is where I'm bad, where I'm terrible, where it's like, man, I can see both. It's like, man, like I really, really did that well. I didn't do this well. So I can ask the why questions over here, right? But then I can also ask the why question over here. why did I do that well? Why was that easy? Why was that? Man, let's push into that, because then as those things start happening, then you're able to find why this part's broken.
And then you can move that scale.
Yes. And that's where belief is so important. It's like when you were out there throwing your freaking filth, you weren't thinking about that you didn't throw 100. At no point were you thinking about, man, I wish I threw harder. Right? I'm sure there were some instances where, like, man, 3 miles an hour would have been nice.
But that was the off season. Yeah, that was the off season. But I learned that lesson the hard way too, where it's like there's a fine line. You know, we talk about getting one day better, right? And a lot of times I've had conversations with guys, and they're like, I've gone through a season, and I don't think I ever got one day better. And I'm like, oh, interesting. You know, I think that's maybe one way to look at things. But let's say maybe your fastball never got any better, or your slider never got any better. But what about your recovery routines? Like, because a lot of times for me, it wasn't one day better. Wasn't just the obvious, like, it's your fastball and you need to be harder. Like, no, there's a lot of other things that, you know, if we truly believe the way you do anything is the way you do everything, it matters how I brush my teeth. It matters if I take care of my dishes. Did I make my bed? Did I do these little things along the day that, you know, like success leaves clues, but also success breeds success. So it's like when I start doing things and I start knocking off this checklist, this little ding, ding, dings going on in my brain, right? And now when it comes up to that challenge, it's just another thing to check off, versus if I failed to make my bed, I never brushed my teeth, I left my dishes in the sink, I've already compromised 3 or 4 things that I know better on as it goes through the day. Now, when it comes to something that let's say really matters, like my competition, and I've already compromised, it's going to be so much easier to compromise. Yes. Versus there's this level of excellence that's being replicated through my day as I'm going through my routines. Now, all of a sudden, when it comes to my time to do my thing, just going to do my thing like I've done my thing all day long. And I had this workout for, I'm trying to think who it was. I think it was for the Twins at the time. And I went to Vegas with Brian Kane to watch some of the fighters. And we were walking into their hotel rooms. He had their keys. So we go into their hotel room, and he had written things on the mirror for each one of them. Right. And the one that kind of stuck out in my head, and it was different things to each one, but fight your fight. So for each one of these fighters, that meant a different thing. Right. And as for each one of my pitchers, that might mean a different thing, where fight your fight could be, just as simple as your game plan. Get ahead, mix it up, put them away. But what if you're a right-handed side armor versus a left-handed starter? Right. Your way, your game plan might be the same, but the way that you're going to go through and fight your fight or pitch your game or trust your stuff is going to be a little bit different. Right. And I think that, I mean, being around guys who dealt with other athletes and other sports and seeing the carryover to the way you do anything is the way you're going to do everything, where it's like all these little things, really none of them are little. We call them little things. We can compartmentalize them as that, but in reality, all those little things are summation. They all add up. They all of a sudden, here's your full day, right? I had all these choices today, and I checked all these boxes. Well, seems like, that was a one day better kind of day, versus if I just kind of went through the motions and just showed up. To me, I mean, I know they say showing up's a lot of it, and it probably is, but I think at the same time, if you just show up, that's not it.
I agree.
There's the preparation that gets you there, that it's like, now once I get there, now I get to shine, versus thinking I'm gonna just go ahead and chill out on all this stuff, but I'm gonna do really good at this. I was guilty of it, especially in college. I can tell you right now, I mean, the way I approached class versus the way I approached the field,
for sure,
there were two different things. I mean, it was like a contrast shower, hot and cold. Now looking back and dealing with enough other athletes and seeing success leave clues again, I've realized now how much more the coaches I would talk to are like, there's the way you do this is the way you're going to do this. If we trust you here, we know we can trust you here, right? If we know you're going to attend class and you're going to take care of all your assignments, yeah, you might be the guy on the mound when the game's on the line. If not, you might just be the guy that's on the bench.
Yeah. I love that. That's so good. And that's such great perspective and explanation for what that actually looks like. And I would say what I hear you saying is just shrinking success down to small victories that are super attainable. You may have lost in a big situation. You may have lost whatever, but you can also have 19 other wins that you had. And, people think it's trivial, right, to celebrate like a small victory. There's a leadership guy I listened to, and he said the way he realized about 5 years ago that he was not as disciplined as he wanted to be. He's an older guy, he's a grandfather, he's in charge of a huge organization. He said, I just started by one thing a year. I just added one thing a year. I was going to do 365 days a year. That was it. And he's like, you're going to laugh, but the first one was brushing my teeth twice a day. He said, I did that. I made sure I did that 365 days for a year. And he said, what I've done is then I started adding like a couple a year. And he said, now to this point, I add a new one every month, to where what's cool is that the more you do it, the less those are actually disciplines and they're more just habits. And he's like, so I'm really not adding that much. I'm really I'm just stacking these things. And so I can look back and say, no, I did this and I did this and I did this. And I made those right choices. I won those situations. Yeah, I didn't win that. You're right. But if I'm going to embrace that, I can also embrace all the things I did to get one day better. Because one day better is such a terrible word, especially in American society, right? What does better mean?
So relative, right?
No, it's so relative. That's such a great way to put it. And man, better doesn't necessarily mean improvement, I don't think, right? Better just means not losing.
Could be a better way of just thinking about it. Or let's say your perspective just changes. Or hey,
even if it's that much. Yeah.
One day it might be like, hey, we all say, if I could put myself in that person's shoes, and it's like, okay, well, first of all, that's a really difficult thing to do. But at the same time, if you can somehow remove your predispositions for whatever, and then see something from even just a neutral standpoint, there's a lot of power in that, and sometimes can just shift where you're like, man, sometimes things happen that, let's say, you would never plan or you would never want to happen. But then once they happen, they open up your eyes to so many other things that you were just unable to see. So it's like sometimes in life, it's those little things that happen that give you this whole new perspective and appreciation for something that maybe you took for granted.
That's enough. That's the uptick. Right? Yes, that's enough. And
one day better.
100%. And that's where it's shrinking it down, especially in baseball. Success looks about 3 things, 4 or 5 things. That's it to people. And in reality, if it's only 3 things, you will not stick around in this game long enough to enjoy it. Now, we want those 3 or 4 things, right? We want to come up in the clutch. We want to be the guy. We want to be all of those things. But there's a bunch of other stuff along the way, right? It's just the old cliche stuff that people talk about, but it's cliche for a reason. It's they're good. There's good 0 for 3s and there's bad 3 for 3s. There's a good 7. There's a good 5 innings where you give up 6 runs, and there's a bad 7 innings when you give up 3 runs. It just works that way. And so it's when you shift that perspective, you're looking for things to win at, as opposed to, well, I got to hope that all this comes together and I get 1 win. It's it's a whole lot more powerful when you've stacked days of winning 20 small things up for a year. That's a lot of things. That's a big ass thing when you get finished, you know?
Well,
Like,
especially versus like if you looked at all those things and you compromised on all those, like something as simple as like, let's say planting a garden, because we talked about this a little earlier, but the foundation we call the roots, right? So
mhm,
if we're going to plant a garden, which is typically what we're doing as coaches, right? The first day a guy comes in, all we can do is dig a hole, plant a seed, cover the hole. That's it.
mhm.
It's up to them to go home and water it, give it sun, right? Or practice any of that stuff, right? Otherwise, if I see that same kid a week from now and he never went home and applied anything or practiced anything, we're basically starting right back off. And I mean, we're going to dig another hole and we're going to plant a seed, but it's that other seed never really took root because it never got water and it never got sun.
Mhm.
So, it's the same thing that we're talking about, those little things throughout the day that become those big things over time. They all matter.
They have to.
What you eat matters. How much you sleep matters. What you think about matters. Who you communicate with. Who you choose to hang out with. All that stuff matters over, that term. And then
Agreed.
all of a sudden we come back and we got all these fruits and vegetables or sunflowers or whatever we want to plant in our garden. And if we did a good job at continuing to maintain those and we planted more as we went, wow, now we got this beautiful garden versus,
Yes.
and that could be your life, right? Versus let's say you're going through that same life and you're just leaving all these dead seeds in the ground. And then you come back and you're like, well, what do I have? Well, I never really let anything take root.
Hmm.
If I never let anything take root, how could I expect fruit?
Mm-hmm. It's so good. And the thing with that too is a beautiful garden has things that die in it, right?
Part
The
of the
things that fail and don't take root, things that are beautiful and then they die. It's part of it. Like beauty is nature. In nature, beauty is the the toughness that it took for the plant to grow on the mountain in Sedona. Like that was a long time. Or the the bobcat or the fox or the whatever that was able to survive, and they're very strong, and now it's the whole thing. That's what makes it beautiful. Beautiful is such a powerful word that is overused and underutilized at the same time.
Well, nothing in nature blooms year round. There's nothing, not even, I mean, we were up there last week. I went up there with Hunter and we were playing catch on the log and looking around, and it's like everything had gone away except for the pine trees. And then we were like, man, what are those pine trees got figured out? And then we went over, walked over to the pine trees, and guess what was on the ground?
Pine tree.
And the pine cones.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the pine cones came down and they have to fall off the tree in order to go back into the ground and create another tree. Right. Like it had gone through this process, like you're talking about. It had grown, the tree itself, and then all of a sudden there was these pine cones and they fell off. And that was to start the next pine tree. And I think that's where, with what we're talking about, certain things that we plant as routines and ideas, some things work, some things fail to work.
Mm-hmm.
We want to do more of those things that work for us and then eliminate those other things that maybe at that time failed to work.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, you could still go back and revisit some of those things, because just like something like we were talking about at the beginning with a cue, let's say that cue of, hey, make sure you get your hand past that hip as a reminder of finishing the pitch or whatever you want to call it. That cue might work for a week, or it might work for a month, like you said, but you got to have other things. And if they're roots and foundational, you can say things different ways to fix the same issue. The
Mhm.
solution and the problem are still the same. It's just how did you go about doing it?
I love that. Yeah, it's
Love
great.
you, how to do that, about it.
So good, man. Well, y'all, there's a lot to listen to there. As always, listening to Zing will make you a whole lot better and a whole lot smarter and all
And
that
yourself,
stuff.
sir.
I appreciate that, man. I try to bring stuff that makes sense. So, but yeah, so y'all, it's awesome. We love these conversations. We miss these conversations, and so we're glad that y'all get to be a part of that and listen to it and stuff. So, yeah, so y'all listen to that, take some notes, and do what Zing says, and you'll be a lot better. I think.
Oh, now.
So, all right,
I
y'all.
mean,
Well, we'll
it's the same thing, right? It's ownership, peeps, right?
Mhm.
We can sit and talk about this stuff all day, but unless it actually has a way to be applied to what you're doing, then
It's nothing.
yeah.
It's nothing. So, well, it's good stuff, y'all, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you next week. So,
Thank you so much for watching. I'm sure you were able to get a lot out of that. So because of that, make sure that you share this, right? Make sure that you put it out on social media, on your stories. Make sure that you subscribe, give us a 5-star review, because our passion is to see the game grow, and our passion is to see you become the best baseball or softball player that you can. So go ahead and do that for us, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode.